Good afternoon and welcome to another virtual program from Turnstile Tours. My name is Stefan DW and I work with Turnstile Tours focused on waterfront. If you're new to the program, welcome, and we'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to see and how it's going to work today. If you're returning to this program or one of our subscribers, welcome back and thank you for your ongoing support. Turnstile Tours normally does real life tours in person in places around New York that make New York work, whether that's the Brooklyn Navy Yard or tours at food carts or the Prospect Park. And we connect these nonprofits, such as the Prospect Park Alliance or the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, with people from our community and from beyond our community. So the pandemic has been a challenge to continue to connect people. We have found our way to do that through Zoom and through these programs. A key way that we do that through Zoom is through the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to click on the chat function and let us know who you are and where you're from, and we will interact with you there. Also, if you have questions for our guest today, and our guest today is from the South Street Seaport Museum. So if you have questions for Jesse Levitz from the South Street Seaport Museum, you can drop those into the chat, and I will see those and pass them on to Jesse. Get your questions into our tour today. We have a lot of ground to cover, a very exciting topic, talking about things you don't normally hear about at South Street Seaport Museum. We're talking about how the boats are maintained. So we'll be meeting the fleet, but talking less about the history of the boats and much more about the recent history and planned maintenance of those boats. But before we get into that, one other item, those of you who prefer to read what's being said rather than just listen to it, you can use the closed captioning function. We have Andrew Gustafson is backstage and he's madly typing away to make sure all of you can see what is being said. And of course, we have Cindy Vendenbosch, who is coordinating everything in the background as well. So Cindy, if you would, let's take a look at some of the upcoming events we have here at Turnstile Tours. We have some virtual programs on the docket. The next one is I'll be hosting again. This is Saturday, August 1st, and we're talking about the Melvilles. That's Herman and his brother Thomas. It's Herman Melville's birthday, August 1st, and not a lot of people know about Herman Melville's brother Thomas, but he played an important role with Sailors Snug Harbor, the retirement community for sailors on Staten Island. John Rocco, professor at SUNY Maritime over in the Bronx, will be here talking about his research into Thomas Melville. And we'll also be talking about U-boats and bootleggers, keeping the nautical theme going on Tuesday the 4th. And if you were with us in the early days of the pandemic, you may have caught Rev Jen Miller talking about her troll collection. If you missed that, you definitely want to go back into our archives and check out that incredible show. Also, make sure you're here on Friday, August 7th to see Rev Jen Miller return to talk about her paintings of Coney Island cats. I'm very excited for that one. And one item in particular I want to point out, you see at the bottom of the list here, we're on August 15, we have Voices of World War II, Brooklyn Navy Yard Oral Histories. This is a free virtual program, and it's the kickoff to a series of programs we're doing celebrating the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. We'll also have a program on September 2nd, which is marking the signing of the surrender, and that is in Japan, that is, and that's a program we're calling From Arizona to Missouri, Bookends of World War II. So look forward to lots of programming on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. And for those of you here who are here for the boats, also take note that I'll be back on August 10, Monday, August 10, with Barbara Delensick from the City Island Nautical Museum, talking about the maritime industries of City Island, which is a really unique and exciting place in New York, and one that's dear to a lot of our hearts. So I'm glad we see some people out there who saw the show and also are big fans. And we got some folks here from Long Island, and we're glad to have some returning voices out there in the chat, including Howie. And let's get back into the program, and we'll bring in Jesse Levitz and ask him to turn on his microphone and his video camera. Hi, Jesse, how are you?
Doing well, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Andrew, for all having me here. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and you and I have talked a lot about boats over the years, and we should also note we have a personal connection as we're both alumni of Earlham College, not in Indiana, not a place associated with boats, but just a little bit of your background that had your work at Earlham did have something to do with your getting into boats, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I worked on historic preservation tasks, taking care of the old observatory for 4 years at Earlham. It was something that sort of where I got a taste for it and wanted to mess around with old stuff.
You went from the stars to boats, but you stuck with historical preservation. And exactly. And so today, you're what is your title and role at South Street Seaport? I'm
a director of historic ships at the museum. My job is essentially the care and feeding of our collection of historic ships and preservation work whenever funds become available, high-end capital work. And I've been very lucky in the entire history of South Street Seaport. I don't know if as many maritime preservation tasks have been undertaken in such a short period of time as it has for the last 5 years.
Well, I'm very excited to hear about those tasks. I hope that the pandemic has helped South Street Seaport get some maintenance done that would be difficult to do otherwise. I know it's been true for a lot of other institutions. It's been sort of all those things we put off because we have visitors in the place. But I understand, as I said, we're not going to talk in depth about the history of these vessels so much as the history of their maintenance and what your planned maintenance is on those. So let's get into it. I know you've got a lot of ground you want to cover.
All right, let me see if I can share my screen. That should be right with everyone.
It looks great to me.
Turn on my little pointer. Very good. So these are the 4 vessels that we're going to be talking about today. They all have fabulous, amazing histories that I will not discuss, not in any extent, but I do want to discuss the really Herculean preservation tasks that we've undertaken. First one being with our flagship, the Wavertree, ship Wavertree, made of wrought iron, 1885. Essentially, in its day, it was the rider truck of the maritime world. Vessels like this plied the seas all around the world, made the British Empire work, and made New York City work. Here she's in dry dock. If you see right here, the wetted surface, she was maintained regularly with dry docks through her history, but at no point did the capital exist to do a full-on restoration of everything. She sort of looked like this for much of her time at South Street. 3 lowers, not much else. Paint would be fair to middling most of the time, but we finally got funding to be able to bring it back. In dry dock, we had to do so basically blast and paint the bottom. She's made of wrought iron, so welding in steel turned into a complicated process, but it was done well. There's certain tricks for welding wrought iron, which we're better at now than we were at the beginning, and that'll serve us well with our other iron ship, Pioneer. After we cleaned out the bottom, all of this stuff, this is the lower hold of Wavertree. It was filled with junk and various pieces of what used to be the sandhopper, because she was a sand barge for quite a long time. She was launched again with this all repainted and then had to be reballasted. In order to keep her upright, in order to keep her in the right position until the reballasting was done, these giant 75-ton each water bags were put below. And as the permaballast, which is essentially a clay, was added into the frame bays here, the water bags removed one by one. What you see in the overhead here is the Tween Decks. That also was renewed and renewed with all the right fittings and fixtures. The difference is it's steel and not wood like the original Tween Decks. What you see here is the new steel decking that replaced the wood decking that traditionally had been there. Wooden deck on a composite built vessel like this is a hard thing to maintain, requires a lot more labor than we have available. We went with a steel deck. It is set in, which you can see if you look closely on the edges there, so that at some point we could put a laminated wooden deck over it if funds become available. We decide that's the way we want to spend them. And this provides us with a sound, watertight, sealed envelope that's relatively easy to maintain. We did the same thing here with the housetop of the Liverpool house or the accommodations for the crew. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. We had to renew the rig. That was probably one of the biggest parts, single parts of the entire job. We use laminated spars because beautiful straight trees this long are very hard to find now. And I think the decision is probably we best leave them standing. We don't need to cut them down. So these are laminated up from pine, pressure treated, and reuse the old irons. And then here are the basically the fittings, the eyelets and the brackets for the jack stays. Jack stay would be a rod that goes through there. Sailor talk is easier than you think. A jack is a sailor. The rod that goes in through here, the jack stay, is what keeps the sailor on board and not falling down.
I think you make some great points about the sort of the ecological question about maintaining boats, but you used to specifically refer to laminated lumber here a couple times, both with the spars and the decks. When you say laminated, Laura would like to know exactly what does that mean in this case?
Laminated is essentially built up. In this case, it's resorcinol glued. Think plywood. Plywood is a laminated wood product. Essentially, instead of making out of one giant piece, it's multiple pieces glued together. You can actually get something stronger than the original and something straighter because it doesn't tend to move with the grain. And you can use smaller, fast growth lumber and still have something of equal strength. These are pine, so they had to be pressure treated in order to work effectively.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So the wire service turned into a rather massive job. Essentially, there's about a half-mile rigging up there on Wavertree that needed to be taken down, cut apart, and reserved. Wire service is essentially a 19th century technique before galvanized wire. These are the wires that hold the rig up, the mast and so forth. So in order to preserve it, it was essentially bundled in string and cloth and tar, and the tar was what preserved the wire. You couldn't paint these things because they flex. The paint would have fallen off. So here we have Boyd doing wire service. Essentially, he's got this mallet. This is a spool of twine right there. And as he spins it around this wire, it lays down a single layer and you just keep going. It's about 6 turns per inch. And I figured it was about 400,000 turns to do the whole rig. Hard to find people willing to do that these days.
And that's a tremendous amount of work. This is all extraordinarily labor intensive. How much of this is volunteers and how much of this is people that you're paying to do this work?
For that job, it was almost entirely paid people because there's also a level of skill getting the tensions right, getting it set up right, and so forth. Once you're in the groove of it, it's fairly easy, but trying to do it right does require a level of skill. We weren't able to use a lot of volunteers, and there's a reason that people don't build boats like that anymore. Way too labor intensive to be economical in the modern world.
And tremendously expensive to maintain, I imagine. And that really.
Well, we tried to do it well so it'll be around for a good long time. But what we were tearing down was service that had been put there maybe 30, 40 years ago. Wow. And in another 30, 40 years, we'll have to do it again. Right. Back in the day, the sailors would maintain this stuff regularly. We do as best we can at the moment, but it is a hard piece to maintain. You can see the service here, the rope wrapped around, the small string wrapped around the wire, and then leather chafe gear put over it with a baseball stitch. You should recognize that. 14 whole hides of leather were purchased and used to wrap all the wires. The leather keeps basically the wire from eating through the mast as it moves, and also keeps the mast from destroying the service. So the leather has a vital function. When finally done, here she is coming back into the pier with all those wiry bits up, the entire standing rigging. This is the first time Wavertree has been rigged, fully rigged like this since her dismasting off of Cape Horn in 1911. And the reason this project could be done is thanks to the City of New York, $13 million from the Mayor's Office, Borough President, City Council, and the Office of Cultural Affairs. I don't know if any municipality has ever undertaken a project of this sort. Upcoming project on Wavertree is the forecastle house. Essentially, that was the deck house you saw forward. Currently, this is an empty box except for the galley, which is relatively complete. But none of this equipment exists at the moment, none of these bunks. And we have a grant from the Maritime National Park Service Maritime Heritage Program to rebuild these. We hope to undertake that in this winter, ideally.
Did I hear you call this a Liverpool house?
Actually, that's probably the wrong term. Liverpool houses are a little larger. A forecastle or a forecastle house is probably the right way to describe it.
And cool. And Robert wanted to know where the Wavertree work was performed.
Was all the Wavertree work was performed at Cadell Dry Dock in Staten Island.
Great, thank you.
They also had to, the steel work and the ironwork they had down, but they had to bring in a whole rigging crew to rebuild that rig.
And we should briefly acknowledge there are a lot of volunteers out there from South Street Seaport saying hello and seeing themselves in photos. And it's one of my favorite things about doing these programs at South Street Seaport. We've got Teresa and some other folks who are saying hello out there.
I thank you. One of the things I'd love to point out is it was former volunteers and South Street riggers who were hired to put the rig back on Wavertree. It was a professional job. They had learned their skills at the seaport and were able to actually use it to help us put the boat back together. It was really an amazing effort.
That's incredible. Thanks.
The next project, which was tackled, was the W.O. Decker. She had sort of fallen on hard times. Her Coast Guard certificate had been declined, and she really had no function and no funding stream at the moment. As she was originally built, here she is, a child of the Depression, a small steamboat, 75 horsepower, requiring a massive crew of 4 for a 50-foot boat, essentially a switching yard, basically called a creek boat. Think of a switching engine in a train yard would be her function. She would make up tows. And I am pretty sure, given that this was started in 1929, when the market crashed, building a wooden boat is a wooden workboat in New York City, coal-fired steam is all anachronistic, even in 1930. So I'm pretty sure this vessel was built to try to keep the yard workers busy during an economic cycle. Even the port lights, which are overly large for a vessel of this size, I think probably were left over from another job. If you talk to any shipyard right now, you will discover that if they aren't busy, they do their own projects. This was their own project. It was built by the yard for the yard. Everyone asks me where the name W.O. Decker comes from. Here it is. William Oscar Decker, the father of Oscar Decker, who was running the company in 1947 when he got the boat, named it after his dad. And I'm very grateful for Barbara Decker for bringing this picture to us at the Waterford Tugboat Roundup last year, so we would have that for our collection. Our goal for the ship overall is to return it to the 1964 W.O. Decker colors. That was when she had a diesel engine and no longer a steam engine or an inferior diesel engine. And we did it. This is how she looks now. We didn't go with the Terracoma Towing Company-esque faux finished wood, which Decker did have in 64. So it's sort of an odd thing to have a wooden boat faux finished in wood. We just went with yellow. I can't find anyone to do that, and it's a high maintenance task. So we got there. This is W.O. Decker in the shipyard. Again, it's Cadell Dry Dock. They again had to build a crew. We had to bring in a shipwright woodworking crew to do this. And here's the whole boat looking aft forward. The house has been removed. The deck has been removed. The engine's been removed. And we're replacing the deck beams here, the shelf here, and bits of the ceiling over here. Wooden boat terminology is more confusing than even other terminology. The ceiling is here on the wall and under your feet. That's the ceiling. The floors are actually structural members underneath all this, similar to a joist in a home. The deck beams have the deck on top. So when you're below, the ceiling's on the wall, the deck is over your head. And don't let anyone tell you that boats don't have soles. They do. That would be what you would be standing on down here if you weren't standing on the ceiling. That should be straightforward enough. One of the problems we didn't anticipate was marine borers. We actually did have an underwater survey and none of the damage from these critters was seen at the time. It was actually under things we discovered later on. These are creatures that were not a problem in New York for 100 years. And then we cleaned up the Hudson, and as well as getting all the wonderful things back, we now have shipworms and gribbles and all these marine borers back, which we never had before or hadn't had for 100 years. These are, by the way, eating away the wooden piers of Manhattan. There are articles on it fairly often. It also ate away at our vessel. This is actually a mollusk. It's a bivalve. Go ahead, Stefan.
Oh, just yeah, that's of course the Turnstile Tours is based in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I always point out the dramatic moment when we realized we had a problem with shipworms, that they were back, was in the mid-90s. We had one of our piers collapse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard that was covered in gravel. There was a boat coming in as it collapsed, and sort of a mark that the harbor was returning to health. So it's definitely a good news, bad news situation. I'm really glad that you're bringing attention to these, both as a risk for our historic vessels and a testament to the cleanliness of the water.
The water is certainly clean enough to do well by these. These are also, though, worthy of note, these are amazingly hardy animals. This shell that is this worm, and that's the hole where it went into, they can be up to about the thickness of a pencil and maybe 2 feet long. They run through the grain of the wood and eat the plank out from inside. If hauled out of the water into the dry, these animals will insist themselves, basically close themselves up into their shell and a little pocket of sort of muddy nastiness around them that will preserve them for up to a year on the heart. So once you got them, they're really hard to get out. You actually have to cut the wood out that they're in and replace it. Gribbles are another common one. There's actually small crustaceans. They do a lot of, they do this sort of damage that you see here. It's extensive, but they don't live forever, unlike the shipworms, which are amazingly hardy. It's because of this damage that W.O. Decker is currently up in Kingston, New York, soaking in fresh water, because though they can live without water for a long period of time, they can't live in fresh water. The osmosis gets them. Because of all that work that we had to do, because of all the damage done by the shipworms, all of this woodwork needed to be replaced. 40% of the deck planking, the stem, and the horn timber, which is essentially the structural member in the aft end of the vessel, all replaced with oak, all back painted and fastened securely. We spent a lot of time trying to prevent these guys from coming back. The engine, the GM 6110, also got a thorough rebuild. And what we discovered is that there are barely any parts left anymore. Forgive the shameless WD-40 promotion. That's not supposed to be there. We will never find parts for this engine again. I think I pretty much bought everything that was on the market. So we did a very thorough rebuild. It'll be good for 20 to 30 years, but in 20 to 30 years, we'll probably need to re-engine the boat. The house was taken off. That's the picture from the advertisement, and put in here into another house to be rebuilt. What I loved is we had shipwrights working on the ship, and we managed to get housewrights who essentially focus on timber framing and church steeples and things like that, rebuild the house for us. Stephen?
You've mentioned so many extraordinary, such a variety of problems, that challenges that you face in this work, both monetary and technical, and we have just a few minutes left. So I think we can get through all our W.O. Decker pictures, but I also want to make sure we have time to talk about the final boat in our list. So what was the next step after fixing the house?
I will move a little quicker here. The house goes back on in primer. You can see this is ice sheathing, which is protecting the wood underneath. And then W.O. Decker, we got her Coast Guard certified for the first time since 2012. They saw her as a new vessel and they had to redo the whole certification. That was a bit of effort, but she had her first season since 2010. I want to definitely say we had probably 1,000 passengers and about 200 education students on board during this first season. since 2010. And I do want to make a point of recognizing the funders here: a National Maritime Heritage Project Grant, New York Canal Corp, a dedicated funder, individual donors, that's people like you, and a very generous shipyard. Here is W.O. Decker as she looks next to some of the more modern tugs. Wanted to get into Pioneer. This is Pioneer. You may not recognize her. She at this point is 1954 is lighter. You can see the name. You can see she's loaded down to the waterline with something. Probably oil. These are oil drums here. This essentially was moving oil up and down around Connecticut. Pioneer, more recognizable, built in 1885, rebuilt in 68, came to the museum in 1970, has been the workhorse of the museum since 1970. Over 250,000 paid passengers have gone on, over 1,200 times underway from the dock. In 50 years, she's seen a little worn. The centerboard trunk we knew was worn. Unfortunately, during last season, the 20-year-old engine also packed up. We had to be towed up to Albany to get her hauled out and properly repaired. Blasting the paint, trying to find everything that's wrong. We had to remove, I'll wait on that, sorry. We had to remove concrete ballast as well, but that comes up later. We had to study the hull, UT shots, essentially figure out how thick the hull plating was. And unfortunately, in the main hold, underneath a layer of concrete and perlite, so forth, we found this. This is the exterior 3/8 hull. Originally, as I said, 3/8 of an inch, that's 0.375. You can see these readings. All of these places where it's below 281 all require a replacement. So it'd be a little patch here, a little patch here, a little patch here, something like that. That proved not economical or safe. To make her into a quilt with all that welding stress would not do well. And this is typical of everything we found in the hold level of Pioneer. Result of water getting through cracks in the concrete, through the perlite, and sitting on the hull plating underneath. Frame, basically these are floors that also needed to be repaired underneath the perlite concrete. Here we are in the process of replacing them. You can see the new frames next to the new floors next to the old floors. The purpose of all that was to keep the shape before this had to be put in before this one was taken out. They did a remarkable job. There it is, all tacked in place. New centerboard trunk is installed. New shell plating on the bottom, 3/8 here, quarter on top as she was originally built. Missed a spot there, but I'm sure they'll get to it. And on to Ambrose. So this is Ambrose as she looks today. Wooden houses, 1933 roughly configuration when she was dieselized. This is what we want Ambrose to be again. From that magic moment when 15 million immigrants saw Ambrose as the first thing they saw in the harbor, this is her configuration from 1907 all the way till 1933. You'll notice sails, wooden mast, weird little things on top. Her yellow color, very tall stack. We are lucky we have the original or copies of the original construction drawings and the bid spec from the Bureau of Lighthouses from when they put this out in the early 1900s. We have that complete plan set. And here's what she would have looked like. This is her 1910, tall stack, weird little thingies on top, tiny little house. These two big houses we'll talk about in a moment, and small scuttles going below. We're gonna have to modify that a little bit for visitors, but we do wanna keep this appearance and that mustard yellow color. This is also being paid for by the City of New York, Mayor's Office, the Borough President, City Council, and the Department of Cultural Affairs. This project is yet to take place. We're in the early stages. The details that are going to be fun and challenging for us are the lighting system, which is these hoisting lights that live in the house during the day and are then hoisted up top. Clearly this one has a problem on its way. All the way up, triple lights, originally oil. In Ambrose's case, these were electrical. I know of no examples of any of these lamps remaining, so replicating them will be a challenge. And then a day shape so it doesn't just look like another schooner that's anchored in the outer harbor. And I think that finished me up. I'm ready for questions now. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to contact me with specific questions. My email here, our social media, and any donations that you care to make, if you specifically for either the Wavertree deck house or the ongoing pioneer work, which will hopefully be done before the end of the year, please contact us, let us know, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, Jesse. We're just about out of time. We're a little over time here, but I really appreciate your mentioning ways that people can support this program, which, you know, the work you're doing is just incredibly important. And if it's not clear to you now, check out the South Street Seaport Museum. And hopefully, you're closed right now. Do you have plans to open in the near future?
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Yes, the Wavertree, the exterior decks, the public decks on Wavertree will be opened on Saturdays in September. Stand by for more news on that, but we want to open them in a completely COVID-safe, comfortable way. So stay tuned.
Good news, Jesse. I was just informed that I have been on autopilot from our previous times. I apologize for shortening you up. We are actually ahead of schedule, and I apologize to everyone for that. So we do have time for questions, and we've had questions. So one piece that came up. So feel free. We can go back and dig into some of your other points in more depth. But we had Mark Rivlin chimed in. He's been a member of the museum for 41 years. And you know, do you have a relationship with members? How do members impact your work, Jesse?
Well, let me put it this way. The very first preview of the Wavertree opening is going to be a members only event. So I hope he has the opportunity to go down there if he's comfortable and healthy and feels well about it. But members have always been critical to the well-being of the ships. A lot of our collections comes from members. A lot of the institutional knowledge and object knowledge comes from members. I really appreciate having you.
Now let's get back into your slides here, because I'm sorry I gave you short shrift on that. I want to take a closer look at a couple of these. So let's go back a few slides here. Now, with the Ambrose, for instance, you referred to the things on the mast. Can you tell us more about how the Ambrose worked, and you know, what are the challenges you're facing in taking it from what we see on the left to turning it into what we see on the right?
Well, there's this feature here, which is essentially a cat head that was removed. You can actually, when you see Ambrose up close, you can see the rivet pattern. It's basically a hoist for the anchor. After all, what lightships do, in case people don't know, is it's a floating lighthouse. Essentially, when the technology wasn't available to build lighthouses in these difficult places, they would build a lightship, essentially a floating light with a very massive anchor. Those would sit there at a month at a time, be relieved, and that was a navigational aid. Ambrose was the key navigational aid to New York Harbor until she was relieved in 1968. But what you're seeing here is a day shape. These were only available, it looks now, it would look like a radar reflector on a modern ship. But the function of it is when you saw this vessel, and the further away, the less you see. So the first thing you're gonna see is just these little bits. This will tell you that this is the Ambrose during the day. A light doesn't tell you much. Lights weren't overly bright back then. So when you would see these shapes, you would know that's Ambrose. And like I said, this looks like a schooner. It is a schooner. There were a lot of schooners back in the day anchored about. It would be easy to mistake this vessel for just an anchored schooner without those symbols. Granted, the yellow hull would probably clue you into something. Her simple rig was she was steam powered. She did have a screw, but all the vessels previous to this had sailing rigs. So this is sort of an auxiliary sailing rig, probably used to steady her while she was at anchor for prolonged periods of time. And that mustard color is pretty much right. Go ahead. You
showed us plans that you have for this, right?
Yeah, this is one of many. I at one point had all of them in here and figured I would bore everyone to tears. But this is one of the plans that we copied from our archives, and they're measure drawings. That shows that funny little knee, that cat head, and then there's the hull that you see now. You can see that line. Sails, a tiny little wheelhouse, a little scuttle going below, ventilators to the engine room. These are the houses that house the lights during the day. You can see the lights hoisted up. Another little scuttle going below and a skylight. A very open deck, which will be useful for programming. Her whistle, fog whistle, is 12-inch diameter whistle. We made a heck of a noise. And here she is in actual real life. You can see the giant whistle. You can see the day shapes. That may be deformed because of the way the picture is, or that may, in fact, that oval thing may have been closer to what it was. Small house here, and then the bizarre little lamp houses as well. Sailing rig is in place, but there are no sails in place. It looks like there might be something furled up there, but it's hard to tell.
So there are a tremendous lot of changes that happened to this boat over its history. This is not what it looks like at all today. What do you know about those changes? Why did they happen? Well,
they modernized like everyone. This is a lot more comfortable. This is a Radio Shack that had to be put on when radio entered into it. She didn't have that initially. She would have had a giant antenna here. And then this larger accommodation, larger wheelhouse. This is a very stark utilitarian vessel. This is a much more modern one. But the material condition of these wooden houses, they're not salvageable. There is nothing salvageable in them. Maybe the portholes, but even they're pretty nasty. So for historic preservation purposes, preserving it in this appearance, which is, by the way, what they all were reformed. There's no lightship quite in this condition anymore. They all basically rehabbed in the 1930s to this more modern configuration with the fixed lights up here. So we will have a unique vessel. There's a surprisingly large number of lightships around the country. I think there are 3 in New York City alone. And having it in the previous configuration, I think will show the difficulty of the initial service a lot better. And it also has wonderful programmatic features with things that go up and down and so forth.
So we referred briefly at the beginning to the fact that you, in undergrad, were interested in history, but you had a physics background. A question from the audience about how you got into this work. What was that transition like?
I've always loved the historic preservation side, and I love learning the history. What I really, truly adore about my job is I get to study it, I get to design it, I get to build it. Most people don't have that luxury, that opportunity, and I'm thankful every day that I do. That was something that was missing from my academic existence in college, which is why I undertook as a volunteer to restore the old observatory. So it just took a while to find a place where people would actually pay me to do that.
We've had a few comments in here. Maggie Flanagan would love to hear that horn blow, and they're wondering whether they've, there's some question about whether the Ambrose's horn has been blown. Do you have a sense of how
this little one here is still in place? There used to be almost sort of a calliope of air horns here that were, when I worked here restoring the Letty Howard in the 1990s, I think 1993, they all worked because one of the little compressors worked. I'm sure they would if we were to pump air to it. And I guarantee when she comes back, we'll be tooting the horn.
Wow. That's, my understanding is that is like break the windows loud. So I'll be on the other side of the East River when that happens, but I'll definitely be on the scene. That's incredible. Question is, are there archival recordings of the horns blowing that you know?
Not that I'm aware of, not specific, but I'm sure somewhere there are archival recordings of horns. Also, some of the other lightships in this country do have their horns in place. We will need a massive compressor to run a 12-inch horn. So there's a little engineering challenge lurking for us there, but we should certainly be able to do it once with a bunch of tanks.
If you can indulge me for 2 seconds, can we go back and look at W.O. Decker for a moment here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What aspect do you want to see?
Well, the engine for one thing. That's such an extraordinary problem that you have there. You said, so you don't really have, there are no more parts out there. You have everything to maintain the engine. What's your vision?
I think I bought them all. I don't know of any ones that anyone was willing to sell me. So we have this. We have a set of spare injectors that can be rebuilt. Even finding people who are willing to do that sort of rebuilding work is pretty difficult.
So do you have any vision for what happens next, when it needs further work?
So this engine was last rebuilt, I believe, in the late 1980s, and was still running when we pulled it in. The nice thing about these old GMs, this is essentially design that was built to win the war. These are incredibly hardy machines. You can lose a whole cylinder and it'll keep running. Wow. So we had a cracked block. We had a crack in the cylinder head. The block was completely corroded, and she was still running strong when we came in. So I feel confident that we can certainly get at least 20, probably 30 years out of this rebuild. I think by then, because we did explore the possibility of refitting it with a modern Tier 4 diesel, which is, by the way, what we're putting in Pioneer. She's going to be environmentally much friendlier. And,
right. When you say Tier 4, that's about the emissions. Is that right?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an emission standard. It's an air quality standard. It's the highest standard currently available or enforced. And we would have wanted to put a Tier 4 in this. Pioneer's getting that with her rebuild, which will also give her 20% more horsepower than she used to. So cleaner and stronger is good. But there's no Tier 4 or tiered engine, Coast Guard approved, EPA approved engine that would have fit in Decker that's available on the market right now, because these rules are all from the last 10 years and the R&D is lagging behind. I suspect in 30 years, this may be some sort of electric solar cell thing. And yeah, we actually talked about making an electric boat. Again, the technology is not ready for it yet. So we're going to hang on to this thing a little longer.
I'll be really excited to see how that develops. Lewis is counting lightships, and he's wondering what third lightship you might be thinking of. He knows you got the Ambrose and the Frying Pan.
And whatever the name of the lightship that's in Liberty Landing.
Got it.
I don't know the name of it. I don't know its history, but I know it's a lightship.
Yeah, there are a lot of lightships all over the place. And if you're looking for what the Ambrose looks like today after they finish the restoration, they have their slightly older twin is a lightship I know well in Seattle, and England and Europe seem to just be lousy with lightships. So they're
the Switlick, that's what you're talking about, right?
A Swiftsure, yeah.
Yeah, Swift. She's the one that is probably closest to what we intend to be. And they have just put down a beautiful carvel plank deck, which is something we don't intend to do because that's a high maintenance item. Probably a little safer in Seattle where you don't have the frozen winters that we do. We're probably going to go with a similar method as Wavertree, where it's going to be a solid, perhaps steel deck or something, because originally it was a wooden deck, but it was canvassed over. So it would look no different, and then painted. It would look no different than a steel deck, and the steel is much more durable and lower maintenance.
Yeah, I know the Northwest Seaport has gone to great lengths to try to make sure that they've slightly re-engineered the deck to make sure it lasts as long as possible. But that's definitely the last time they will do it in wood, because they use the huge pieces of clear straight grain Douglas fir, and those trees just don't exist anymore.
They don't, and and what they had just got used up. All of this damage inside of Pioneer's hull comes from deck leaks, leaky portholes, leaky hatches, so forth. It's water coming down. None of this was caused by water coming up, and it's the water coming down that does the most damage to historic ships. So that's the thing you have to control most.
Let's see, we got Maggie says she believes working tug Benjamin Elliott, the New York State Marine Highway, is twin screwed with the same engines as Decker. So I don't know if you know about that, but that's a nice connection to have.
I know it well. I've talked to the owner. He is because he's making his living with that vessel. He's very smart. He's been hoarding parts for a decade before I even started, and he's not giving anything up. And I can't blame him for that.
I'm so glad you've come back to this photo of Pioneer. Was this common for schooners to be dismasted and then motorized in the turn of the century or later?
Very common, actually. There's a term, steam schooner, which never even had a rig. It's a West Coast term, really. The wonderful thing about these iron hulls, and wrought iron is sort of a folded iron baklava, if you will. The way it's made is you fold the iron over upon itself, and it encapsulates slag and carbon and so forth. you don't get this sort of strength you do from steel, but it wears so much better. The rust goes inside, and instead of just penetrating right through like a drill, it hits these slag pockets and stops. So old iron hulls survive very well. So this is Pioneer as an old iron hull, but still had some utility. And it was very common. In fact, there's whole books and TV shows on the Falklands showing the wrecks that came out of Cape Horn. The iron ones are the ones that are most intact.
You know, as we were preparing this, we talked about the Peking, and you mentioned that, of course, the Peking is no longer at South Street Seaport, but you brought up a really interesting point, which is that the boats that we're looking at today, these are all boats that are really important to New York's history. They're New York boats, and the Peking wasn't. It wasn't a boat that ever visited New York. So in terms of the investment that the community is making, whether it's the municipality or individuals, members and other donors, are you involved with the curation aspect about making choices about how South Street Seaport is choosing what story to tell and making sure it's a New York story, or are you just working with what you have?
My primary job is to preserve what we have. I obviously contribute whenever possible to programming and stories, but we are not looking to grab another major capital ship, that's for sure. We're full up as it is. And I think the removal of Peking from our hands, now if someone had come forward and given us $60, $90 million to restore Peking, I'm fairly sure we would have done it, and we would have done an excellent job of it. But that's how much the federal government of Germany is spending on the Peking to get her restored. Her story is an amazing story of German accomplishments. She was designed exclusively to haul guano, that poop, from Chile back to Europe for the nitrates to feed the people of Europe. It's an amazing story, has nothing to do with us. I'm glad we had it here. I'm glad we had it as a platform for education. It's really the pinnacle of the engineering of that day of giant square rig sailing ships. And I'm glad it's getting the attention it deserves.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to help them tell their story. We've got Captain Martin chiming in here. Malcolm Martin says a big part of the reason that Pioneer survives because she worked her whole life, that she was always a working boat. That went through that transition, and which is a real testament to the importance of our working waterfront New York. That if we're doing work and industry on our waterfront, that helps keep it alive.
Every one of our vessels has that near end of life story. Right at this point, when they were done with Pioneer in the late 1950s, she was pretty much destined for the scrap heap. Russell Grinnell stepped up and picked it up. W.O. Decker had various moments in her history where she was destined for the scrap heap, and people were able to pick it up. Wavertree was no longer a vessel. She was a sand barge when we picked her up in the late 1960s and brought her here. Ambrose, the whole lightship service was being disbanded and lightships were being thrown away. We managed to salvage that. So all of our story, these are all survivors. That's the unique feature that all these ships hold.
Well, as is the museum. New York has gone through so many changes over the years. Can we go back to that final slide so people know how to contact you and how to connect about making sure this museum, survives and thrives into the future here? So you've got all the, you've got your personal email there for work, and you've got the social media and a place to make donations. If there are any last questions, we'll take those now. But anything else that you'd like to share with us, Jesse?
Well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope those of you who are able and interested can come down and visit us and see the Wavertree in September. And ideally, when we are all open up again and doing tours, I hope to see you on our vessels.
Yeah, so definitely check out that seaportmuseum.org/support. And we'll see you at the boats in September, maybe blowing those horns before you know it. And we'll thank you so much for joining us, Jesse. And for all of you out there, and you can stop sharing your screen now. We'll return to our audience for a moment and remind you that we're able to bring you these programs because of your support. So please do look at becoming a member of our museum and our programs. And maybe Cindy, can you throw the membership slide back up there for a second? So this is how you can make sure these stories continue to be shared at the quartermaster level of $20 a month or the apprentice level of $5 a month. And you'll get access to these programs, our past programs, including the programs on knots with Frank Hanneman, who helped work on Wavertree, and lots of our upcoming programs celebrating the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So once again, thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you again Saturday for our program on Thomas Melville and Herman Melville and future programs to come. Take care. Thank you again, Jesse, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me. Be well.